The first time I caught her in my pool, I thought a raccoon had fallen in. That's how loud the splash was. I ran outside with a broom raised like a bat, expecting to rescue some half-drowned critter, but instead found Karen well. Her real name's Denise Vanderhill, doing the backstroke like she was at a luxury spa. I stood there in my cargo shorts and sandals, jaw halfway to the ground. "Denise, what the hell are you doing in my pool?" She didn't even flinch. Just paddled to the edge, propped herself up on her elbows and said, "Well, Frederick, as HOA president, I'm entitled to ensure all community amenities are functioning properly. Consider it a routine inspection." I blinked. This isn't a community pool. It's in my backyard, behind my fence, with a locked gate. She smiled like she was doing me a favor. Yes, well, I had my concerns about the safety standards. These things affect property values. I should have thrown her out then and there, but I was too stunned. I just watched her climb out dripping wet in a leopard print one-piece and stroll back to her house 2 doors down like nothing happened. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, she was back, this time with a towel under her arm and a pair of sunglasses on. I got home from work and saw the gate wide open. My stomach sank. I stormed into the backyard. "Denise." She was halfway through applying sunscreen on her legs. "Frederick, I must say, the chlorine levels are much more balanced today. Excellent improvement." I pointed at the gate. "How did you even get in?" She waved her phone. "I told your neighbor I was checking on a possible water leak. She let me through her yard." That neighbor was 92 and half blind. She'd probably let a coyote through if it said it was with the HOA. I told Denise, "Get out now." She took her time packing up, wiped her sunglasses, folded the towel. I stood there fuming like a kettle about to boil over. When she finally left, she added, "You really ought to be more welcoming, Frederick. After all, as HOA president, my responsibilities include keeping the neighborhood pleasant and uniform." Uniform? I built that pool myself 2 summers ago. I paid for the permits. I installed the privacy fence and signed off on all the city inspections. Nothing about it was community property. But Denise had this inflated idea that because she wore a laminated badge with president on it and held monthly meetings in her living room with stale cookies, she was queen of the block. The next week, I installed a new padlock on the gate and added a camera above it. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Saturday morning, I was eating breakfast when the motion alert pinged on my phone. I checked the footage. Denise, scaling my fence like a bored teenager sneaking into a concert. She dropped into my backyard, strutted over to the pool, and cannonballed in. I nearly choked on my toast. By the time I got outside, she was floating on her back, humming. "You've completely lost your mind," I said. "Do you realize this is trespassing?" She opened one eye. "Frederick, you're being dramatic. You're part of this HOA. That means cooperation. I didn't agree to you using my pool." "Well, we'll just have to add a clause in the next bylaw revision." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing stopping me from blowing a gasket. You can't rewrite laws to make my property yours. We'll see what the board says. The board was just Denise and her 2 friends who lived across the street and spent more time gossiping than governing. They treated the HOA like a country club, writing up violations for things like excessive wind chimes and non-regulation bird feeders. I was done. I went back inside, opened the breaker box, and flipped the switch to the pool pump. Then I turned the valve for the backflow drain. 10 minutes later, I heard her yelling. I stepped outside and found her standing ankle-deep in rapidly disappearing water. "What is happening?" she shrieked. "Routine inspection," I said. "Just checking to make sure the pool drains work. You can't do this while someone's swimming. You're not supposed to be in here at all." She stomped out, dripping wet and furious. "I'll report this to the board." "Please do. I'd love to see that paperwork." That afternoon, I stayed home and installed a double deadbolt on the gate. I added a steel latch and bolted a private property no trespassing sign to the fence. Then I forwarded all the camera footage to the local police, just in case. I thought that would be the last I'd see of her. But Denise wasn't just some nosy neighbor. She was the kind of HOA president who thought the Constitution gave her the right to walk into your garage and rearrange your lawn tools because your rake was visibly misaligned. 2 days later, I got a letter in my mailbox. It wasn't mailed. It was printed on HOA letterhead and hand-delivered. The ink was still warm. "Dear Mr. Frederick Parson, It has come to the board's attention that you have violated Article 6, Section 3 of the Community Enhancement Covenant by restricting access to a shared amenity. Your actions are subject to review, and a fine of $100 per day will be assessed until access is restored. Sincerely, Denise Vanderhill, HOA President. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter in my coffee. There was no Article 6, Section 3. I checked the HOA binder. I even called the city office. The HOA bylaws hadn't been updated in 3 years. There was no clause about shared amenities. Certainly nothing about private pools. That's when it hit me. She was trying to fabricate rules, put me in violation of fake bylaws, fine me into submission. And if I didn't cave, she'd probably try to lien my home. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. I was dealing with a petty tyrant in yoga pants. Fine. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every visit, every second of security footage. I even got my buddy Nolan, who used to work with the city zoning office, to help me dig into the HOA's filings. What we found was a goldmine. The HOA hadn't submitted a financial report in over 18 months. The last 3 fines issued weren't backed by any city ordinance. And Denise? She'd been using HOA funds, our dues, to pay for her landscaping service, holiday decorations, and even a new patio umbrella. That pool invasion was just the tip of the iceberg. She wasn't just entitled. She was embezzling. I was about to blow this wide open. On Monday morning, I walked into City Hall with a binder under my arm thicker than a Thanksgiving turkey. I had pages of printed emails, HOA documents, screenshots of the association's website before they mysteriously updated the bylaws, and a spreadsheet Nolan helped me build that tracked every questionable expense Denise had signed off on, complete with vendor names, invoice numbers, and the dates the checks were cashed. The woman had been treating the HOA budget like her personal Amazon account. I asked for a meeting with the city's neighborhood compliance officer. They gave me a spot the next morning. That night, while I was reviewing my notes, someone knocked at my door. I opened it to find a man in a blue windbreaker with code enforcement stitched across the chest and a clipboard in hand. Evening. I'm here about a complaint filed by the Briar Glen HOA. You're Frederick Parson. I nodded. He flipped a page and read aloud, failure to maintain community amenities, unauthorized architectural modifications, and obstruction of HOA access points. I tilted my head. Did they happen to mention that this so-called amenity is a private pool in a fenced yard I paid for? He looked up. This pool behind your house? That's the one. Fully permitted, inspected, and approved 2 years ago. I can show you the paperwork. He shrugged. That'd be helpful. Mind if I take a look? I led him around back, unlocked the gate, and let him inspect the setup. He checked the fencing, pump enclosure, even the water testing kit I kept in the shed. Looks up to code to me, he said. No gate issues, no visible hazards. Water's clean. And this is on your parcel. I showed him the plat map Nolan helped me pull from the county records. Property line runs 6 feet past the fence. No shared easements. He nodded, scribbled something, and said, This is the 3rd complaint I've gotten from this HOA in 2 weeks. The last one was about a guy with a pink flamingo in his garden. Let me guess, unauthorized lawn ornament? He chuckled. Exactly. I handed him a copy of my dossier. You might want to read this. It's why I think they're coming after me. The next morning, I stepped into the city office conference room and laid everything out for the compliance officer, a woman named Marla who looked like she'd seen her fair share of neighborhood drama. She flipped through the records, her eyebrows rising with every page. Where did you get all this? She asked. Public records, mostly. And a few screen captures from their website before they realized someone was watching. She tapped a receipt. Denise Vanderhill ordered $300 worth of LED string lights from a vendor in Florida. Labeled it a community illumination project. Want to guess where the lights ended up? She cocked her head. Wrapped around her backyard pergola. I've got video. Marla leaned back in her chair. This is embezzlement. If HOA funds are being used for personal upgrades, that's a criminal offense. Not just a civil dispute. That's why I'm here. She took a breath and closed the binder. We'll need to report this to the district attorney's office. And since it involves misuse of community funds, I'll be forwarding this to the Department of Consumer Affairs as well. I thanked her and left the office with a weight off my shoulders. But I wasn't done yet. That weekend, Nolan and I hosted a barbecue in my front yard. We wheeled the grill out to the driveway, set up a few folding chairs, and invited as many neighbors as we could fit on the lawn. People came, some out of curiosity, others because they'd had their own run-ins with the HOA's absurd regulations and were eager to trade stories. I waited until everyone had a plate in hand before I stepped up onto a cinder block and raised my voice. Appreciate you all coming. I know some of you have had disagreements with our friendly neighborhood HOA. I've been dealing with a situation myself involving some unauthorized swims and a few fake citations. That got a few chuckles. Well, I decided to dig a little deeper, I continued. And what I found is that our HOA president has been using our dues to finance her backyard makeover. That includes new patio furniture, gardening services, and a decorative fountain. None of which were approved by the board. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone near the front, a woman in a gardening hat, said, "I've been asking for a speed bump on my street for 6 months, and she said there wasn't enough in the budget." I held up a printed receipt. She spent $225 on custom monogrammed hand towels. Says they were for the clubhouse. We don't have a clubhouse. Laughter broke out, but there was an edge to it, anger simmering beneath the amusement. "I've turned all of this over to the city," I said. "And it's being forwarded to the DA. A man near the back asked, "What can we do?" I looked around. "We can vote. We can remove her. Our bylaws allow a special election if over 50% of homeowners sign a petition." So I brought a few copies. People lined up. Over the next 48 hours, we collected signatures from 72% of the neighborhood. Even the folks who usually kept to themselves came forward, eager to be rid of the little empire Denise had built. By Wednesday, we submitted the petition to the HOA's acting secretary, who, it turned out, hadn't seen a single financial report in over a year. She was just as furious as the rest of us. That night, I got a call from Marla. "We've officially opened a case," she said. "The DA's office is moving forward with an investigation. They'll be issuing a subpoena for all HOA financial records." I felt a grin spread across my face. Guess she won't be needing those monogrammed towels anymore. Friday morning, 2 unmarked cars rolled into the neighborhood and parked in front of Denise's house. I watched from my porch as 2 investigators in suits rang her doorbell. She answered in her usual velour tracksuit, clutching a smoothie cup like it was a shield. They spoke for a few minutes. Then she stepped inside and came back out with a stack of folders. One of the agents took them, the other handed her a formal-looking envelope. She didn't return their smiles. Within hours, word spread like wildfire. Denise had been officially served with a notice of investigation for misappropriation of funds and fraud. Someone even said they saw her tearing down the HOA's bulletin board outside her garage. The next morning, I got a note in my mailbox. This one was typed and signed and full of what I assumed were her final gasps of control. "You may think you've won, but this neighborhood will fall apart without proper oversight. Enjoy your unregulated madness." I pinned it to the same corkboard where she used to post warnings about Christmas lights and garden gnomes. Then I taped a sticky note under it: "Democracy is messy, but at least it's not chlorinated." At the next emergency meeting, held in the local elementary school auditorium, the neighbors voted in a new HOA board, one made up of actual volunteers who cared more about potholes than patio cushions. The first item on the agenda was a full audit, followed by a motion to limit the president's spending authority without majority approval. Denise didn't show up. She'd put her house on the market that weekend. I finally refilled the pool. No one tried to climb my fence after that. The new HOA board had been in place for less than 2 weeks when a city clerk from the finance office called me at work. Her voice was low and deliberate. "We came across something unusual while reviewing the audit packet you submitted," she said. "There's a discrepancy involving a second account under the HOA's name, one that wasn't listed in the official filings." I set my coffee down so fast it splashed across a stack of blueprints. "You're saying there's a hidden HOA account?" She didn't answer right away. I could hear her flipping through papers on the other end. "It was opened about 9 months ago under a slightly altered name, Briar Glen Community Enhancement Fund, with only one authorized signatory, Denise Vanderhill." I stared at the wall for a second. How much money went through it? Close to $38,000 over the course of 7 months. Mostly small withdrawals, but there are 3 large transfers. One of them is for over 12,000. That was more than our entire annual HOA budget. I leaned back in my chair, the kind of slow lean that tells you you're about to walk straight into something rotten. Are you forwarding this to the DA's office? We already have, she replied, and the county sheriff's financial crimes division. After I hung up, I texted Nolan. He was already halfway through compiling a timeline of the withdrawals, cross-referencing them with neighborhood events, or rather, the lack of them. There hadn't been a single community project in the last year that justified even a fraction of that money. By Friday afternoon, the sheriff's office had requested an emergency meeting with the new HOA board. They held it at the community library after hours. Lights low, parking lot empty except for a few county cruisers and an unmarked black SUV. I was invited to attend, since I'd initiated the original complaint. Deputy Investigator Morales led the session. She was sharp, mid-40s, carried herself like she'd seen every trick in the book. She laid out a series of printed statements and a whiteboard with a flowchart that was both impressive and damning. What we're looking at, she said, is a coordinated scheme to divert funds from the HOA's operating budget into a private account. From there, the money was spent on personal purchases, including luxury goods, vacation rentals, and payments to what appear to be fake vendors. Morales pointed to a name circled in red ink. Evergreen Property Services. Anyone here heard of them? No one raised their hand. They billed the HOA over $5,000 for seasonal maintenance and landscape upgrades. We traced the account number. It's registered to an address in Tucson tied to Denise's cousin. Another name was circled, Suncrest Management Consultants. That one billed nearly $8,000 for governance consulting. The address is a P.O. box. The EIN number doesn't exist in the IRS database. The room was silent. Morales looked directly at me. You started this with a trespassing complaint. Do you have any idea how much that helped us crack open the rest? I nodded. I figured she was crooked. I didn't think we were dealing with full-on wire fraud. She straightened up. She's looking at multiple felony charges: fraud, misappropriation of funds, falsification of financial records, and possibly money laundering if we can confirm the vendor accounts were designed to clean the trail. Nolan leaned forward. What about restitution? That'll be up to the court. But we're freezing her assets now. 2 days later, Denise was taken into custody. Not quietly, not behind closed doors. Deputies arrived at dawn and walked her out in handcuffs while a few early risers stood at their driveways, unsure whether to cheer or gasp. She didn't say a word, didn't even look surprised. She wore the same velour tracksuit she always wore to patrol the neighborhood. Only this time she wasn't holding a clipboard, just an overnight bag, like she knew this was coming. The trial date was set within a month. The judge denied bail, citing the risk of asset flight and the sophistication of the scheme. Meanwhile, the forensic accounting team kept unearthing new transactions, one involving a wire sent to a spa in Colorado, another to a boutique furniture maker in Oregon. Every time a new report came out, the number climbed. 42,000. Then 51. By the time the grand jury convened, the total stood at nearly $62,000 in stolen funds. The new HOA board began the painful process of rebuilding. They disbanded the previous committees, locked down access to all accounts, and hired a third-party management company to oversee finances. And they made one more change: every meeting was now open to residents and recorded. A month later, I was asked to speak at the first full neighborhood assembly since Denise's arrest. The meeting was held in the local rec center auditorium. Rows of folding chairs were filled with homeowners, some I knew well, others I'd only waved to in passing. The mood was tense but hopeful. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the crowd. We all moved here for different reasons, I said. Some of us wanted peace and quiet. Others wanted a place where our kids could ride bikes without worrying about traffic. What we didn't sign up for was being ruled by someone who thought owning a clipboard gave her the right to rewrite the law. There were a few nods. One man in the second row clapped once, then stopped, unsure if it was appropriate. I kept going. I started this because someone broke into my yard and used something I built without asking. But what I uncovered went deeper than that. It wasn't about a pool. It was about control. About someone using rules to manipulate us while stealing behind our backs. I looked at the new board members seated to my right. We need transparency. We need accountability. And above all, we need to remember that this is our neighborhood, not a fiefdom, not a business. A community. And communities look out for each other. This time, everyone applauded. After the meeting, a woman approached me with a clipboard of her own, but this one was different. She was starting a neighborhood watch group, something informal, focused on keeping an eye out for actual problems like speeding drivers, suspicious solicitors, and property break-ins. Not mailbox colors or holiday wreaths. I figured if folks are going to patrol, they should at least be helping, she said. I signed up. Weeks passed. The pool stayed locked when it wasn't in use. I added a few solar lights along the fence, installed a second camera facing the side yard. Just in case. One afternoon, I found a note taped to the gate. At first, my stomach did a weird little flip, but this one was handwritten in neat cursive and signed by two families from the opposite block. They were new to the area, had heard about the pool incident, and wanted to thank me for standing up. Turns out Denise had tried to fine one of them for having a raised garden bed. The other family had received a notice about unauthorized driveway chalk art drawn by their 7-year-old. They'd been too afraid to push back. They weren't anymore. The trial began in late spring. By then, the case had picked up local media attention. A few reporters camped outside the courthouse. Headlines circulated online with titles like, HOA president indicted for fraud after backyard pool dispute goes public. Denise's attorney tried to argue diminished intent, claiming she was overwhelmed by the responsibility of her position and had blurred the line between personal and professional. The jury didn't buy it. The prosecution laid out a crystal-clear paper trail complete with timestamps, login records, and surveillance footage. The verdict came in after 4 days of deliberation, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 8 years with a restitution order filed against her assets. The court seized her home, liquidated her personal accounts, and began the process of reimbursing the HOA. No one cheered when the sentence was read. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. Life moved on. The neighborhood meetings became less eventful and more productive. We voted to install speed bumps, approved a new playground bench, and even held a movie night on the Greenbelt that summer. Someone brought popcorn in a wheelbarrow. Kids drew hopscotch on the sidewalk without fear. And as for the pool, it stayed mine. Every lock, every tile, every ripple of water. The summer after Denise's conviction was the quietest our neighborhood had ever known. For the first time in years, no one was measuring mailbox heights or issuing warnings about visual disharmony. The new HOA board kept things light, monthly emails with updates, no surprise inspections, and a genuine effort to ask residents what they actually needed. I thought things had finally settled. Then Nolan called one evening with a voice that was too calm to be innocent. You still got your security footage from last October? I leaned back in my work shed, wiping grease from my hands. Yeah. Why? There's something you need to see. He showed up 20 minutes later with a flash drive and a folder full of printed stills. He laid them out on my workbench, each time-stamped and sharpened from enhanced footage. They were from the night a few residents had reported strange activity around the HOA storage garage near the community garden. At the time, everyone assumed it was just raccoons or teenagers. But the footage said otherwise. The first image showed Denise unlocking the HOA garage door. This was 2 weeks after she had claimed she'd handed over all keys. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood a tall man in a faded windbreaker, holding what looked like a bolt cutter. The next image caught them pulling out 3 large plastic bins, each sealed and labeled archives. She was already under investigation when this happened, I said, staring at the photos. Nolan nodded. Which means this was a cover-up run. I pulled up the corresponding footage from my camera network. One of them had a partial view of the garden lot. Sure enough, it captured the car Denise drove that night. Not her usual sedan, but a rented SUV with covered plates. She had parked in the back, headlights off, and stayed less than 20 minutes. Why didn't anyone notice this sooner? I asked. Because the footage was stored on the HOA's cloud account. The new board didn't know it existed until I found the login credentials buried in the old bylaws folder. We drove straight to the new board president's house. A retired firefighter named Jerry who treated the HOA like a community service gig instead of a fiefdom. When we showed him the images, he didn't say a word. just picked up his phone and called the sheriff's department. Detectives arrived the next morning with a search warrant for the garage. It didn't take long. Behind 2 shelves of dusty gardening supplies, they found a false wall panel. Inside was a black plastic crate, duct-taped shut, and stuffed with shredded documents, several USB drives, and a fireproof envelope labeled Resolutions Archive. The envelope contained original copies of HOA vote records, some of which had been altered in the official binder. One in particular caught the detective's eye, a vote claiming unanimous approval for a neighborhood beautification grant that had never been discussed publicly. It authorized a disbursement of nearly $15,000 to a supposed nonprofit called Green Horizon Collective. The account tied to Green Horizon was registered under an alias. The alias belonged to Denise's sister-in-law. Deputies raided both the rental address and her family's home later that week. What they found unraveled the rest of the scheme. Denise hadn't just siphoned off money for herself. She'd created a shell network of fake nonprofit groups, all of them issuing invoices to the HOA for services that were never delivered. Landscaping, consulting, pest control, even community morale initiatives. The funds had been funneled through multiple accounts, some in state, others offshore. The total amount stolen wasn't $62,000 like we originally thought. It was over $180,000. The grand jury was reconvened. This time, the charges included conspiracy, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and money laundering. Her sister-in-law was arrested for aiding and abetting. The tall man in the windbreaker turned out to be an ex-boyfriend with a record for wire fraud. He was indicted as a co-conspirator. I was called to testify. Not about the pool this time, but about the documents I'd originally uncovered, the timeline of her inspections, and the footage that indirectly led to the discovery of the secret accounts. The courtroom wasn't as packed as last time, but the air was heavier. The judge didn't have to say much. The evidence did all the talking. Denise never spoke during the trial. Her attorney tried to argue stress, claimed the nonprofits were aspirational projects, and that the funds would have eventually been used for their intended purpose. But the prosecution had bank statements showing spa visits, designer handbags, and what appeared to be a week-long yacht rental. The jury delivered its verdict in less than 2 days. Guilty on all counts. This time, the sentence was longer, 12 years in state prison, with no eligibility for parole until year 9. The restitution order expanded to include property seizure from all involved parties. Her house was auctioned. Every dime traced to her accounts was returned to the HOA with interest. But the final twist came when a court-appointed auditor discovered that Denise had planned something even worse, a forced rezoning appeal. She drafted a letter to the county, requesting that part of the neighborhood, including my property, be reclassified as shared recreational space under a fake initiative titled the Briar Glen Unified Living Experience. In short, she had been trying to legally make my pool public property. She never got to send the letter. The court ruled it an attempt to commit fraud through municipal manipulation. It was added to her record. The HOA, now under strict state oversight, received a special grant from the county to educate other associations on financial transparency. Jerry asked me to help co-author the training material. I agreed on one condition: we include a section on recognizing the warning signs of power-hungry leadership. We titled it, When the Clipboard Turns into a Crown. Over the next few months, the neighborhood transformed. The community garden doubled in size. A group of high schoolers painted a mural on the side of the old HOA shed, turning it into a lending library. Kids rode bikes without being scolded about helmet colors. People decorated their mailboxes however they pleased. One evening, I walked out to the pool with a beer in hand just as the sun dipped below the pines. I installed a small plaque by the gate. Not flashy, just a brushed steel square that read private property. No exceptions. A few nights later, I heard a knock at the door. It was Jerry with a stack of papers in his hand. "Thought you should see this," he said. The restitution check cleared. Full amount. HOA's officially debt-free. He handed me a letter from the county clerk. It acknowledged the final closure of the investigation and the full repayment of stolen funds. At the bottom, in bold print, was a statement I'd never expected to see. This case is now closed and no further action is required. Jerry grinned. "Guess you finally got your yard back." I smiled. "And my weekends." He nodded toward the gate. You going to open it up again? I looked over at the clean water, the empty lounge chairs, the string lights glowing faintly overhead. Maybe, I said, but this time only for people who knock. That night, I floated in the water alone under a sky full of stars. No clipboard in sight, no rules posted on the fence. Just peace, hard-earned and finally mine.